All right, welcome everybody. It's so interesting to me because, hello, Doctor Who is gorgeous, and I also really love Torchwood. Who thought you could get a spin-off off this show? And then, gee, there was a great idea, there was a great character, and then it's really lovely how they sort of seeded it in, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about Martha, because, Martha belonged in this show, except then she got the other gig on Law & Order, which was like, okay, good for the actress, but you belong in this world. I know, you can't really... Me too. You can't cosplay Law & Order. It's really not that interesting. It's just not the same, exactly. So we are going to chat about why Torchwood still matters to me. This is me. You've seen me. It's just a fun picture my college took of me. I did this, so I'll do this really fast. I did this yesterday. I work for a college called Stevens College. We teach an MFA in screenwriting, and I believe representation is so important. Gets us back to Martha, right? The fact that Doctor Who was thinking about representation and how well they've been doing that over the years. Was a TV writer before I got into academia, so these are all the shows that I worked on, so I'm very interested in things from the writing standpoint, not really directing or anything else. Written by a magazine, there's a magazine of the Writers Guild. I've got a sample over there because I was able to interview Russell when he came to town to be doing Miracle Day, because I knew I was the only person on the editorial board who knew the show. And they're like, would you like to go talk to him? And he was great because like other journalists don't always know his work as well. They're like, I gotta go talk to this guy. And there we were discussing little details, and it was very fun. Of course, I wanted to go, can I write on the show? But he'd already hired really cool people who we will talk about in a little bit. This is the article that was so fun to do. Just to be sitting in the same room and thinking about what it was like to throw ideas around with him was very cool. And there's a bunch of books that I've done. So we'll get into Torchwood, which is what we're here to talk about. My interest in Torchwood bled into another academic friend of mine, a guy named Martin Griffin, and he was on my PhD committee. And he knew I liked both Doctor Who and Torchwood. He was actually from Scotland, and he would talk about the show. He knew it as a child, and so he thought it was interesting there was an American who knew it as well as he did. So we got along really well, even though my dissertation had nothing to do with Doctor Who. It should have, now that I think about it. But when the show aired, when Children of Earth aired, I had an argument with the ending. And he and I had this long water cooler conversation about it, and about, 6 months later, he called me and he said, I just saw a call for papers, which you get in academia a lot is people are putting together book collections about different things. And they want people to write a chapter on whatever the topic is. So for instance, what I did yesterday was a chapter on the new female doctor and how it was to write her. And that was a chapter in one book. Well, he called me and he said, this book called Torchwood Declassified was being put together. And he thought the two of us could write a chapter based on my argument with the ending of Children of Earth. And I was like, really? We could write something? He said, well, there's going to be a symposium in Cardiff. But since I live in the UK, I will go and present the paper. You don't have to be there, but you'll get credit. You're supposed to get that, credit on your resume when you go to conferences. So I was like, okay, I'll write the thing because that'll be fun. And then when they accepted it and they invited him to the event, I was like, well, why shouldn't we go to Cardiff? Why am I not taking a vacation to Cardiff? If I can write it a little bit off my taxes because it's business. So in fact, we presented at the thing. So this whole thing all started with a conversation with Martin, my friend, and it was over Children of Earth, as I said. And so I think what was interesting is we got a chance to go to this academic conference, which was investigating Torchwood, and I heard all kinds of interesting things, some of which helped me put this together, ideas about the show that I didn't think of. And so then we published the piece. So this is why I'm interested in thinking about Torchwood and why I think it should have gone longer than 4 seasons, although Miracle Day killed it, which is a whole nother conversation. But it was a show that was a work in progress with a lot of new ideas. And some of those ideas have slowly seeded into the regular TV that we're watching now. And so I think it's really interesting to look at these original ideas. They were being very innovative, and I like that, and I want to see more of that. I just happen to like this meme because it's true. One of the things that, of course, Captain Jack brought to us was looking at the world in a bigger way, right? And then all the ideas of who he could be and who he could love and who the other characters could be with, they were relatively new if you think about it. And it's a thing that we teach in my program. representation matters. We have to pay attention to the things we're seeing because TV is the thing that comes into your home for free. Pay the cable bill if your parents pay it, right? But we're getting to see things that you wouldn't see if you didn't want to pay the money at a movie theater, right? So the TV is really like so interesting because who knows what we're learning from it. I mean, one of my other fandoms is the monkeys, and I have a whole book on the monkeys and about the fact that as a kid watching them as a child, I would assume, looking back at it as a grown-up, that like all the women on the show must have been bimbos and cheerleaders and all the boys would hang out with them. And when I looked at, as an adult, I discovered that every single girl they ever dated had a job. And she was a girl who took care of herself. And I thought, is that a message that seeped into my brain when I was a kid? That if I wanted to marry a monkey, I had to be a woman of some substance of something? Right? So really, I think messages do come to us. And so I think Torchwood had a lot of really good messages. Now we know it was invented by Russell, and Russell comes to us from Queer as Folk, which was a huge sort of new thing, and this starts in the UK before it even comes to the States. And the States kind of ruined it. I don't know if you, if you see the English version, it's much better than the American version. It is, isn't it sad? Sadly, I mean, please, 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 I never want an American version of Doctor Who. And they've talked about it, and then they kind of kibosh it. Yeah, oh, they've talked about it. It's like, oh, no, 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 no. So we know that his career was built, I mean, he starts in soap operas, as we know. And soap operas get disrespected, but in fact, some of the most innovative stuff happens on TV first in soap operas. And that's true in the States as well, right? There were gay characters for the first time. There were interracial marriages for the first time. These happened on soap operas because only women were watching, and they were stay-at-home mommies or wives, and so who cares what they're watching? Right? Nobody gave it a thought, except that's how then stories seeded into prime time, right? And we finally grow and like that. So he starts in soaps, and he moves into Queer as Folk, and then he moves into Doctor Who. And, of course, he invents Captain Jack, who, you know, let's face it, he's admitted a million times is really like his dream boy. And then he's everybody's dream boy. Exactly. And how can he not be, right? But he said, Russell has said several times, which I think is very important, what he wanted to show on television were things he wished he'd seen as a child. And what he'd never seen was two men be romantic with each other. Not like pornographic sex, romantic, right? The fact that they could dance together in public and that was acceptable. Such an amazing, it doesn't seem like that much, but it's that much, right? And it was to him because he's writing from the perspective of the little boy that he once was. And what wasn't he shown? So really impressive to me how much they moved the needle forward in terms of gay representations. Of course, we're talking about men here, not necessarily women yet. But, you know, you open one door, you start opening it a little bit more. Imagine the idea that you could see two men kissing on television. That just was not done. In the mid-'80s, there was a show here called 30-something, and it was the first time two gay men kissed on American television. And in something like 8 states, they refused to air it. They simply did not show that episode, right? So here in, you know, England, because of Queer as Folk and slowly. So I think Captain Jack is a fascinating character. It's so interesting that he's really, I mean, he's not any particular thing, but he's an American when we meet him. Right? And that's such an interesting, seed that into their culture. Maybe it made it easier to accept because he wasn't an Englishman. I don't know, it's very interesting. But he's a fascinating character, and of course we're going to talk about the fact that he starts out, look, he's bisexual because, look, in Children of Earth we find out he's got a daughter and a grandson. So clearly there was a woman in his life at some point, right? So that's interesting. We don't generally see that representation very much on TV either. People are either this or that, and suddenly it's like, or both, right? He's a 21st century guy, which is a pretty cool thing, right? He likes women, he likes men, he's omnisexual, right? If you're cute, he's all about it, which is why not? And this happened before I teach college, you know, and now I have students who represent as pansexual, asexual. They all are much more comfortable about their sexuality, right? They're not defined by one thing. Well, nobody was having that conversation, really, and I'm not saying only Torchwood did this, but as we start these conversations in the media, they build into our society, right? And people feel comfortable then having a conversation about things. So I've been really impressed that they start with that, and they try to keep it up. I mean, it's hard because we want to see Jack with somebody we know and we like, so it usually is a human. But that was laid into his character, right? This is what it's like to be an alien. Now, we know that eventually they build into him being with Yanto, which is so interesting because we start with Yanto has a girlfriend, and she's the cyber woman that he saved, right? Which was, in one of the things Russell said, when he first offered the job, the actor said, nah, sounds like a boring character. And they said, in the 3rd or 4th episode, we're going to find out you've been hiding your girlfriend and she's a cyber woman. And he was like, oh, I'll do that show. I'm in for that, right? So I think that's so fun. But of course, so again, Yanto, we find out, is bisexual, right? He starts with a girlfriend. That doesn't work. Eventually, he and Jack come together. One of the things I learned on this trip to Cardiff for this event was he is such a beloved character. There is a monument to him. And it's still there. It just about 6 months ago, John Barrowman visited it and was seen there, and it's on his Instagram page. But it literally, and it was not, this is a later edition, this actual formalization of it. It started by individuals. People just putting up poetry in Yanto's name, in honor of him, right? Because he died saving the universe. Amazing. This is a TV character. Right? This is not a real human being, but the story moved people so much that they just started coming here and dropping these things off. And that's why then the city has made it permanent. And this is actually Roald Dahl Place, so that's interesting too, because it ties into all of the English, the culture that we have fallen in love with, if you will. But I just think that's amazing. I can't name necessarily an American TV character that has had a permanent monument in their name. So that's an amazing thing. Now, of course, one of the reasons I love Torchwood is Gwen Cooper, right? And this comes directly again from Russell. One of the quotes he gave me was, I never see good gay representation. I never see good African-American representation. But what really stinks is how badly women are represented on television. And that's an amazing thing for a guy to recognize. But that is, of course, who he is. He's a writer. He's an artist. He's thinking about people as whole beings. And it's true, right? I mean, that's why there's a show on American TV now called Kevin Can Go F Himself. Oh, yeah. They've taken, because for years, as I watched sitcoms when I was a kid, you were always like, why is that really useless man married to that really excellent woman? I don't believe for 3 seconds that he's forgotten their anniversary for 12 years in a row and she still puts up with it. Like, why am I learning that's how I'm supposed to accept my mate? This is nonsense, and that's what that show is about now. She actually, you get 2 versions of it. You see the sitcom scenes, and then you see her alone in a scene where she's planning to murder him because he deserves it, and you're like, wow, okay. So Russell recognized he wanted to bring forth a really interesting woman, and you can't necessarily see a million of those yet on TV, right? We still don't see as many empowered women. In this case, Gwen. And what's beautiful about Gwen, right, is that she's beautiful, but she's powerful, she's smart. We eventually get around to the fact that she has a baby, and she's still going to be as empowered and smart as she is. And she's going to keep her job, and because she has a family that will help that happen, right? So we have actually not just that she's powerful, but she's in a balanced marriage. She's in a marriage with someone who's her partner, not someone above her or below her. Right? They're equals, and they're sharing in their business. And I've got a couple of friends like this. One's a lawyer at a big law firm, and she got partner, and her husband didn't at his firm. So when they decided to have a baby, it was like, well, who's going to stay home? The lady who's making all kinds of money or the guy who's not? I think it's the guy. And he was totally cool with that because they're making tons of money, and he gets to be with the baby. But we're still looking at that like it's an oddity, when it needn't be. It's what's best for this family, right? And this balanced family came to us in Torchwood. This idea that a man would be okay with his wife having this more exciting life. And you think about it, but he's an equal partner. Again, in Children of Earth, this marvelous bit, they're carrying these children away together, they're saving them. He's just as much a hero. He doesn't have to have a job that defines him as a hero. He's one in his heart, right? And so I think he's a marvelous character that we don't necessarily see, again, on American television. Still, when there are women who achieve a lot, they aren't partnered, we're not seeing this kind of balanced marriage. And I see it much more in UK shows and actually shows in Canada. We watch a lot of Canadian TV. One is the #1 detective show in Canada is called Murdoch Mysteries. And she's a coroner and he's a cop. It's in like 1910 Toronto. And they dated for a series of years. And then they got married. And in an American show, like on Bones, they got married, show's over. Show's done, nobody cares anymore, right? Here, they've been married for the last 4 or 5 seasons and they still both do their cool work. And they have this equal relationship, yeah.
I don't know if they do this on British TV. I don't know if they do it on Canadian TV. But until very recently, I haven't looked this year because I've made a habit of not watching television in April and May. Because that's the rape season.
Yes.
That's the season where you see lots of ads of young, beautiful, fertile girls tied up, sweating, crying, with a psychopath with a gun to their head.
Yep.
And all the detectives have got to find her on a countdown clock. And I just get so sick every year, the same thoughts.
Oh, yeah.
The same ad, the same, we're going to rape you if you're out there being a strong woman, you're going to end up in a chair tied up with a psychopath. And I just don't turn on my television to make because of it.
To get through that. Oh, yeah, yeah. We were talking about Brokenwood Mysteries the other day. It's out of New Zealand, and they have a female police officer who's totally cool. She once did get caught by the bad guys, didn't get raped, happily, and she was. They had her tied up and her hanging from like the pole, and her feet were like just off the ground when the bad guy was right there. And I was like, okay, what would I do in that situation? And sure enough, thank God, she leaned over and kicked him in the face and knocked him down and got herself out. She took care of herself. And it was like, why don't we see enough of that, right? So obviously, we're not getting what I think are balanced women or balanced marriages, right? Which is what I really want to see. So that's what Reese stood for me. Now, we come to Martha, who belongs on this show, but the actress had other ideas. Totally fine, you run your own career, you're gonna go do that. But again, in terms of representation, the idea all along was that she would have learned from her travels with the Doctor. Where are you gonna use skills like that? Where else? In Torchwood. So totally useful for her. So to have a woman, and when I wrote about Torchwood, I realized I can't call her African American. They were like, wait. And I said, what do you do? They said, she's an English woman of African descent. So there you go, or whatever descent a person happens to be in England. So think about how great, and I think this would have been so cool if she was a regular on the show. But okay, she chose not to be. But that was the plan. And they did try to use her as a guest whenever they could. And I think that's a big deal. Again, making sure that there was a person of color in the lead of that show. The person of color they ended up with and did keep, of course, was Toshika. And here they did good and they made a small mistake or they fell into a stereotype. Certainly they made her a regular. She has a sex life. She falls in love with an alien. So we're going to go into omnisexual stuff too. So we're continuing the idea of the show. But she also falls in love with Owen. So, she also falls in love with a human. But usually your person of color, largely when that person is of Asian descent, never has a sex life, never has a home family. It's like they don't exist except to be in the workplace. So I would say that the stereotype they fell into was, of course, she is our computer expert. Happens a lot. We just ran into yet another new series in the UK called Annika, and it's the story of a female cop. And one of her assistants, one of the other cops, is the actress who played Cho Chang in the Harry Potter series. Now she's about 30, and she does computer stuff, but she also works in the field. So we've seen her interrogate people. So they've moved beyond that stereotype. They started there, and now we've seen them move beyond that. So I would say that's maybe the one flaw with this character, but they certainly gave her a three-dimensional life. And that's really all anybody's asking for. If you're going to include a character, they shouldn't just be there as window dressing. They should have a complete life, right? And that's been an argument for a long time with people of color on different TV shows. They don't go home to somebody. They're just there hanging out with the white people, helping them out. And it's kind of like, no, they have other people in their life. So Tosh had a sex life. She had love. She had desires, and she went through on most of those. So I think she's a pretty full character.
More action than Jack.
She did. She totally did, which is, that's, I think, innovative. Exactly.
talk's a good game.
Exactly. Well, that's true. And then Owen was an interesting character. I mean, he could be your bland white guy, except he wasn't a nice guy necessarily. And they had to put up with him because of his talent, and he had to learn and grow. So I think he was an interesting character. He's not the most interesting of all of them. The fact that he had a relationship with Tosh says a little bit about him, right? So he's not the best character, but he was, I mean, if you had to have a second white guy, he was okay. But here's where I start thinking about the writing makes the show stand out, right? What they did in Torchwood, they of course repeat when we come along to the Jodie Whittaker Doctor, because they made you think we had a regular we didn't have in the pilot, right? That's a trick that's hard to get away with. But they made sure and wrote in a person who looked like they were part of the team and everything was happening, and then they die in the pilot. And you're like, whoa, what happened? Yeah.
How close is that to bridging?
Bridging in terms of?
Bridging. Do you know what that is?
No.
In comics, if you have a woman that appears once, and then she disappears and becomes the motivation for the other character, it's called bridging.
Oh.
Because it started with Green Lantern, his girlfriend goes into a refrigerator, gets killed in the first episode. And
Bridging.
you don't really get to know her very well, and so there's no plot development of her. She's just a tool.
Well, that's beautiful. Thank you. That's news I have not heard because I'm not as well versed in the comic world. But you know what? I would say that doesn't suit either of these characters because Susie comes back a couple of episodes later, and with Grace, they knew what they were doing. They knew they were killing the woman of color in that pilot. But they made sure she came back in Graham's visual, right? He saw the visions of her, and Ryan talks about her all the time. They even showed the Doctor going to a funeral. How many people have died in the course of Doctor Who? I never once saw any of the Doctors go to a funeral. They respected her enough, she stayed to go to her funeral. That's how important that character is. So I think I wouldn't claim it as that, but perhaps that's something they learned and they tried very hard not to do, which I think is really interesting. My other story of that, and I'll get to you in 2 seconds, I promise, is when I talk about Buffy the Vampire Slayer, we get to the Tara-Willow relationship, and that's the first lesbian relationship on television, and then, spoiler alert, Tara is killed, and that is the beginning of the bury your gays trope, which went on for a few years. But then Emily Andress, who does Winona Earp, if you haven't seen that, it's quite good, on Sci-Fi, and now it's on Netflix. When she created her series, she gave Winona a little sister named Waverly, and she's a lesbian who has a relationship with the local town sheriff. And the producer, Emily, promised, never in the run of this show will either of those women die. I will break this trope. And sure enough, you get to the end of the 4th season, the series finale, and it's the lady's wedding. She's gone all the way to that point. So, and some people told her that's a bad idea because we want the worry about our characters. But because she promised they wouldn't die, she also got to be more innovative because she put them in some of the worst possible situations where you could never get out of. And as an audience member, you're like, okay, they can't die. How? So you were equally involved. It wasn't like, well, I know they can't die, I don't care. It was like, how are they going to get out of this? So the interactivity stayed. So I would say that is, I don't think that's fridging, but that's really interesting. I'll add that to my conversation from now on. Yeah, you had a question.
I was thinking along the same lines, like when you were explaining it, I was thinking about Grace, and I thought that it's like checking a lot of boxes, and then I realized that while she's a lot of part of their life, I feel like she isn't like their character motivation. I think that they aren't like trying to get her back into it, like Clara was trying to get Danny back. There's no like, go get her back. It's not like, and that's like their drive to be traveling. I think it's like a very fine line with their dancing, but I think it's like that one final piece just isn't exactly there.
I love that. That makes sense to me. Now, taking in this concept, I think that's true. She's not the reason that Ryan goes at all. Trying to think in the way, I mean, you could almost say that Mickey's the reason that Rose goes simply because she realizes she wants more excitement in her life. I don't know. But that's really cool. So, in terms of, I think, again, innovation, I think I've not seen this in an American show, right? This is not a thing. So I think it's very cool that they get away with it twice. And they get away with it because of being creative with their publicity. And that the UK is not that small, but smaller than here. And the idea that they could go to the newspapers and say, do us a favor, you're going to figure it out from the call sheets. You're going to know these people don't exist after a couple of episodes, but shh, let us do this. Let us have this surprise. So both shows were put out with the extra character as if they're a regular. This is the cast of this new show. And you're looking at it going, wow, that makes perfect sense. And even, especially the picture with the doctor, it's like, oh, you want to have the two flanking each side. It looks balanced. It looks perfect, right? But they're not. So they literally worked with the journalists and the people that they had to deal with, which I think is cool. We don't necessarily do that here. It's all about breaking news. I just found out this character's dying next week. Thank you for ruining it for everybody.
Invested all this time. I don't want spoilers. Yeah.
Exactly. I want a little book where they're hidden in. Don't tell me.
I don't watch the social media at all because they ruin it.
Yeah, they totally do. I mean, I think that's a problem. So it's so interesting to me that the UK can sort of be tight enough that they're all willing to get in on the act. And I think they understand that's what's going to make the piece more popular. They want the piece to be more global and more people to pay attention. So this is a big deal. I can't name an American show that got away with this, right? So I think that's pretty cool. They were early in the concept of bingeable television, right? The idea of doing 5 episodes, 5 nights in a row, bang, bang, we're done. That's a season? Nobody was doing that. I will say nobody. We actually did do that in America in 1977, 8 nights in a row. But sadly, that's because they produced Roots, and then the network got cold feet and went, oh my God, no one's gonna watch this. What are we gonna do? So they dumped it into 1 week, hoping that 1 week would be the bad ratings and it wouldn't hurt the whole season. And then it turned out to be the highest rating thing in like the last 15 years and went on and on for many years after that to be the highest rated miniseries ever. So we had done it, but nobody had done it since then, all right? And it was not a big thing in England. And then suddenly we have Children of Earth. And for me, was very bingeable. Before Netflix and bingeability existed, I remember starting it at like, you know, maybe 8 or 9 o'clock at night. We're like, we'll just watch a couple. And then we'll watch the rest tomorrow. And then you got to like the end of the second one, and you're like, oh, we got to watch one more. One more. And then it's 2 in the morning and you're done. And you're crying because it was so terrible and so sad. But you had to see it all in one dump. Yeah,
I would literally run home from work and find a VPN and watch it on the BBC when it aired every single night.
Oh, how cool. See, I wish I could have done that.
Craved for it.
Yeah, it was great. It really was because it's really well written.
It's really well written.
It's really well written. I mean, for all the, you know, Russell sometimes goes off the deep end, but because it was such a tight thought, right? And it was the morality question, right? Do you give up the 10% in lieu of the rest? That's a war question. That's, you know, thinking about it, what would you do? So it was a perfect idea, well executed, and I think, you know, lured us into this world of bingeability. Now, most of my college students, they don't watch a show. They don't want to, even if a show airs week to week, they wait till the whole season's over so they can watch 12 episodes in a weekend. Yeah.
I also want to say that I really did like the way Children of Earth, for a lot of people where something doesn't affect them, they kind of like push under the rug. They're like, we're not gonna, but like the way that they talked about the ableism that would come from that situation, I thought was really interesting because like you wouldn't expect a team of people that are in power to kind of like think about that, but it just made it like so much more realistic because like everyone watching would know exactly what 10% would be sacrificed. Like everyone knows, but they had the guts to say it, which I thought was really interesting.
Russell does that. That's what's so amazing to me about his writing. I really love his writing. I'm looking forward to him coming back to Who. I'm looking forward to, you know, all the future stuff he does. It's a Sin just ended, and that was, you know, quite good. Most of my students were very excited about that.
Did you see Years and Years?
I saw the pilot, and it was so hard. It's in my queue. I have to take my time to watch it. So I know it was, but it was so hard to. It scared me too much, which is really interesting. And I knew that meant he was going to go deeper, and I have to be like in a mood to quietly sit and soak that in, so I don't run through it and get scared. Oh yeah. But no, that's true. And my favorite line in all of Children of Earth is, "What are the school tables for?" And you're like, oh my God, like we do rank people all the time. Here would be a perfect chance to say, sorry, you didn't get your SAT score, bye-bye. It was chilling how real it felt for being obviously such a surreal and not real instance. And also the line when all the leaders are around the table and the woman says, well, certainly none of the children that belong to anyone here, but wait, I don't have children, but I have nieces and nephews. What about them? And suddenly you start seeing that, what little deals are we going to have to play? Yeah, I think it was chilling. So I think that bingeability, that was a big thing he brought to it. Now, I've said before, not a fan of Miracle Day, largely because I think he didn't check the idea that never dying isn't inherently a problem. I mean, they tried to make it a problem because, yeah, too many people on the earth will be a problem, but actually, like, isn't that what everybody wants? Like, nobody wants to die. So it seemed odd that, like, we were supposed to not like it. I don't know. It didn't seem to me he thought his way through. But what worked with that, at least in terms of how television is produced, is that he was producing across the pond, across the ocean. It was a cross-cultural thing, right? So he came here both to include some American actors and, for me, to include American writers, which I think was really interesting, right? And he really wanted to do that. He actually came specifically to work with Jane Espenson, who I adore brilliantly from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but she's done many, many things. Right now she's on the Nevers. And he talked about, when I met him, he talked about how he'd watched her work for so many years. And it was his dream to come here and create a writer's room, which is different from what they do, again, in England. They usually have their set guys, you're all gonna write 2 or 3 episodes, go home and do it, you and I will meet over lunch and chat. But here, of course, we get together every day and sit around the table and talk and talk and talk. And he wanted that experience. That's one of the reasons he came here. And he wanted it with her, which is really kind of cool. And she adored working with him. Admits that the show didn't exactly work, but adored the experience. And so now that we have that happening, gee whiz, Neil Gaiman is doing Sandman in London, and he's brought over Alan Heinberg, who's an American writer who's been in Shondaland for many years, done several of her shows, and then was the writer hired to write the first Wonder Woman movie. So he's an American guy through and through. But Neil Gaiman was like, that's the guy I need on my show. So now Alan has moved to London for the last 9 months, working with Neil. And just as it was an honor for Jane to want Russell to work with her, Alan felt that way about Neil Gaiman choosing him. So we're gonna have the two sensibilities in this one piece. And this stuff didn't happen in the past either, right? This is a new idea that we can do that. Partially that's also built up with Netflix and the idea that now we're watching more international television. It's not just American shows going everywhere, and Americans now have this access to newer things. So I just think that's pretty amazing. All of this to me comes from Torchwood. And I did want to make a quick bit about this. Yesterday I mentioned this book to some folks. It's The Writer's Tale, where Russell talks not just about the last series with David Tennant, but also he talks about writing Children of Earth and how the questions and the ideas were coming to him and what he worried about, and then the actual watching the pilot and the different, going to the edits. He really discusses the job of being executive producer and how much work it was. And he was doing both of those things at the same time, which is crazy, but that's how people do it when they do it in town. So to me, these are the many reasons why Torchwood is still worth talking about. And I do wish they had kept to the Alien of the Week and done that for maybe 5 seasons before we went off into Children of Earth, and then I would have ended right there. Because my argument with my friend, which started all of this, was that at the end of Children of Earth, when Jack has to sacrifice his grandson, for all the good work that Russell has done with female characters, my argument was, why wasn't that his son? Because by making it his grandson, if you remember, the mother was outside the room banging on the door, so he usurped his daughter's power as the parent of her own child and killed him, as opposed to if it was his son, I mean, you shouldn't kill your kid. You know what I'm saying? That was like this one degree of separation, and that made her character useless and unempowered. And I don't know why that occurred to him at all. So that was my argument, and that's actually what my article is about, why that didn't work dramatically for me, in that it dealt with that female character. But it started the whole thing and caused me to be very interested in Torchwood. So thank you all for coming. Anybody have questions or chatty things? Yes.
I find, and I watched last night, and you watched tons of reels of Jack, because he's such a popular character.
Yes.
And he knows he's a popular character.
He does.
And so it just occurred to me as I was watching it, it reminds me, well, first off of Ace Rimmer and Red Dwarf. I'm sure they were making fun of Jack there.
Yes.
But he reminds me of just this whole line of immortal narcissists. I mean, you can look at the Vampire Lestat, you can look at Superman, you can look at Batman, all these immortal narcissists, they know they're strong, they're powerful, they can get through anything, they're gonna live forever, they have no consequences to what they do. So are they gonna be a benign narcissist or an evil narcissist with some kind of lens? And he fits very much into that benign narcissist pattern. He only deviates from it a few times here and there. And I thought, it's almost becoming a trope.
Oh, it is. I think you're right.
Because there are just too many of them now. And the question of what happens when you're outliving everybody. I remember they brought that up once on Bewitched when I was a kid. Darren asked one time, I'm going to get old and you're not, what's going to happen? And she said, well, I can make myself look old along with you, and you think you're still going to outlive me. And it's a very interesting thing how writers deal with that to me. I think he was a fun character because he was just so damn good looking and just all around good.
And he knows it.
He knows it. He'll take from everybody, he'll give to everybody, and everybody loves him for it and all of that. But, and that's, I think, also why people were willing to be dragged into Lestat's world, too. He was the same thing, even though he was terribly dangerous.
Exactly. See, Jack's not. That's the one that I don't get. The whole with the all the Vampire Diaries and the Twilight and all that stuff. I don't get. Like, they can kill you. He can't kill you. He's just hopefully going to be good in bed.
The lure of getting the spirit of immortality was this guy having a great time. Is the thing that
It's for yes.
that's the
To be
freedom.
bitten, right? Then
Now,
you're
you may not get to be immortal. You just don't know that at the time you're begging for it. So there you go.
right.
But
Which is why I like Buffy better, because
yeah, I love Buffy.
Buffy wasn't immortal, and she had to deal with that in both Angel and Spike.
Yeah, and that did a better exploration of it, I think, than probably any other set of characters.
Yeah.
That
Although I
was-
must say, I show my students school reunion because the best conversation ever is the one where Rose figures out, wait a minute, you're going to leave me behind.
Yeah.
And that's, and I remember when I first watched that, and my brain went, wait, he's about to say I love you? The Doctor can never do that. He's never done that. What's going on? Oh my God, they're moving into this other place of story. And of course, they didn't go there.
And for the longest time, the Doctor
Yeah.
he was an almost immortal for the longest time, and now he has an out, and he's basically going to be immortal forever.
Exactly. Well, for as long as the BBC can make money.
Exactly.
Sadly.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But this character, it's the fault of Red Dwarf. I can't watch it anymore.
You can't 'cause
without
you see
seeing
that.
Ace Rimmer. I just can't.
Oh, that's so
And it spoils it for me. I really wish now that I hadn't seen the character of Red Dwarf because I really loved Jack.
I know. I missed. That's why I think they could have gone 6 seasons on the regular setup of the show, and it interests me that they didn't. But Russell talks about in the Writer's Tale, he talks about he jumps ahead in stories. He always wants to get to the fun stuff, and he's afraid that if he doesn't get there, people won't be interested. So he skipped too fast at a time when he didn't have to. And writers make mistakes, and then you can't go back. Obviously, thankfully, there are audio stories, and there's other ways they've kind of kept Torchwood going. There is some discussion about bringing it back. There's always discussion about that. But
Fan fiction, where you can do whatever
fan
you
fiction,
want.
thank goodness. Yeah, I know, thank goodness. But it's also, we see John sometimes, there's a show called QI, which is a little game show thing, and he'll be a guest sometime. And it's so fun to see him, and it's like, I wish he was still on the show. Of course, and it was lovely when he came into Jodie Whittaker's period, and now we're like, oh, clearly next season he has to show up again. So, and since Russell is there, Russell will bring him back because, he's Russell's favorite character. So.
Superheroes take care of it by always throwing in an evil character who could actually kill the superhero.
Oh, you have to have that.
Yeah.
You have to have an Achilles heel, otherwise it's no good.
I think that's the master with Doctor and all of that, but Jack is immoral and beautiful and now he's
Haha, you poor thing.
And he ages.
He does?
He said he ages. He
Yeah.
says, like gray hair here and then there is the face of both.
Exactly, which they sort of left behind. Exactly. Hi. Please have a seat. Hi. Yeah, what's your question?
So I was thinking about what you were saying about like when he, can't remember the guy's name, but when he killed his grandson.
Oh, yeah.
And how like kind of and how like removed it was. And I think I was thinking about it and I thought, like this rings a bell, like something, like it ringing a bell and I thought, that's something the Doctor would do. It's not Jack would do. Like, no, I feel like no one can look me in the eye and tell me that, like, if the doctor had to make that decision, like, and was pushed hard enough, the doctor would have pressed those buttons. But I think that it was just kind of odd because they kind of wanted to bring that kind of darkness in. But Jack has a different kind of darkness. I feel like he's less separated from the darkness. He relishes in it, whereas the doctor's like, I'm going to remove myself from the situation. This isn't my son. This is my grandson. Like, this isn't my planet anymore. You can deal with this. And it felt very like if he had been traveling alone with the doctor for a long time, like 12 kind of said with the shield, like, you can't do that because that's what you become.
Right.
I feel like if Jack had done that and then that had happened, it would have made so much more sense with the whole, like, turning people into soldiers kind of idea.
I like that. And you're right, that's another mistake I see writers make a lot is when you really know a writer, which happens in the Doctor Who world, but not always, like even in American TV, we don't always, Shonda, we know who Shonda is, but there's a few writers you don't know. They'll do a thing where that's where their brain goes, and they're not even stopping to go, wait, that belongs to this character I normally write, not this character I write. You'll hear like the voices change. And it's so interesting. Or sometimes I'll tell students, you'll see them doing this, and you can see professionals do it. There's a line that's the actual writer talking. It really isn't what the character should say right now, but it's what the writer feels like saying. And you go, no, that doesn't belong there, but okay, fine, we'll just gloss over it and move on. But that makes perfect sense after all that time of writing for his doctor to give Jack that same experience when it doesn't belong to him. I like that idea. See, where were you when I needed to fill up that chapter? But that's what's fun about it. You can still sort of debate and toss around. I mean, I must say, in all the Doctor Who and all the Torchwood stuff, and Sarah Jane, also quite a fun little show to pay attention to, there was always more discussion. It made you think about other things, which doesn't always happen. A lot of stuff just sort of, I watch that and I'm done with it. I would say it's the difference between cotton candy sort of TV and like actual like nuts with real meat to them that are giving you something to deal with, which is why I like it.
Yeah, I mean, the one with the Brecon Beacons that is possibly the scariest Torchwood I have ever seen.
And
because there are no monsters.
And they could go scary, which of course was the
so
point.
scary.
Get away from Doctor Who, where you have to be a little dancing because it's still a
Yeah.
family show,
Yeah.
and do serious,
And it's so dark, and it's like, and Jack literally says, I'm the go-to guy for torture.
Yeah, this is me. I know. It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
It's really, I mean, it's I think, a quality show. It needs to be rerun more often. Anybody else? Questions, thoughts, comments? Why you like Torchwood? Well, then thank you very much. Everybody have a great rest of the day. I really appreciate having a chance to chat, and I will see you as we wander around. Thank you. Yay!